On the night of November 1st, 1943, Marine positions along Guadalcanal's western perimeter recorded sustained Japanese probing attacks. Sergeant Jack Connor's platoon, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, held a 600-yard line against an estimated regimental force. Intelligence reports predicted a coordinated assault by dawn. Casualty projections ran 30%. The radio log from 2200 hours notes, enemy movement confirmed, multiple sectors, strength unknown. By 0800 the following morning, over 3,000 Japanese soldiers lay dead across the ridgeline. Marine casualties, 68. The discrepancy would be studied for decades. What the planners in Noumea had not calculated was the Marines' willingness to abandon defensive doctrine entirely. The night belonged to those who moved first. The jungle pressed in like a living wall. At 2300 hours, Connor's squad crouched in foxholes dug into volcanic soil, still warm from the day. Each man carried 8 clips for his M1 Garand, 2 grenades, and a canteen half empty. The humidity made breathing feel like drowning. Through the canopy, no stars, only the distant thump of Japanese artillery, ranging shots, searching for coordinates. Private First Class Daniel Oakes, 19, from Sacramento, kept his finger outside the trigger guard as instructed. His hands shook anyway. Records from the battalion aid station show Oakes had reported with fever 2 days prior. He'd been cleared for duty with aspirin and salt tablets. Now he listened to the jungle breathe. Insects, birds that shouldn't be awake, and beneath it all, the crunch of boots on leaf litter. The enemy was close. Someone whispered, "Contact front," and the night sharpened into focus. Connor checked his watch, 23:18 hours. The Japanese would come at them in waves, Doctrine said. Doctrine also said to hold position and call artillery, but artillery needed coordinates, and coordinates required visibility they didn't have. The first flare burst at 23:40 hours, turning night into phosphorus white. Connor saw them then, a skirmish line, 200 meters out, moving through the mahogany trees with rifles at port arms. Japanese Type 38 carbines, shorter than American rifles, better for jungle work. The flare drifted on its parachute, casting swinging shadows. For 11 seconds, both sides could see each other perfectly. Neither fired. The tactical logic was simple. First muzzle flash draws every weapon in range. The flare died. Darkness returned like a fist closing. Connor's radio man, Corporal Luis Vasquez from Corpus Christi, whispered coordinates into the handset, requesting fire mission. The response crackled back. Negative. Guns displaced. Estimate 20 minutes. 20 minutes was a lifetime. The Japanese knew it too. Within 60 seconds, mortar rounds began falling, walking up the reverse slope toward Marine positions. The first one hit 30 yards short, spraying coral fragments and palm bark. The second landed in a fighting hole. 2 men died instantly, their names recorded in the casualty log as Privates Hernandez and Kowalski. The barrage continued. Connor made his decision then. "Prep for movement," he said. Captain Raymond Monroe, commanding officer, had briefed them that afternoon. If they push hard, fall back to secondary positions. But falling back meant exposing the ridge, and the ridge controlled everything. At 00:15 hours, Connor's platoon moved forward. Not back, forward, into the Japanese approach. The maneuver violated every defensive principle taught at Quantico, but Connor had read the after-action reports from Edson's Ridge 13 months prior. Defenders who counterattacked at night created confusion worth 3-to-1 odds. Marines carried packs stripped to essentials, ammunition, water, grenades. They left entrenching tools, gas masks, and rations in the foxholes. Total weight per man, 42 pounds. They moved in single file, 5-yard intervals, using terrain for cover. The jungle floor was a maze of roots, vines, and rotting logs that crumbled underfoot. Oakes nearly walked into a tree before Vasquez grabbed his collar. No one spoke. Hand signals only, barely visible. After 90 meters, they heard voices, Japanese, low and urgent. An officer giving orders. Connor raised his fist. Halt! The Marines sank into prone positions, invisible against the black earth. From this range, 15 meters, they could hear equipment rattling, the click of bayonets being fixed. The Japanese were preparing to assault positions the Marines had just abandoned. Connor counted to 30, letting the enemy gather. Then he fired a green star cluster from his flare pistol, the prearranged signal. 60 Marines opened fire simultaneously. Tracers cut the darkness into ribbons. The Japanese unit, caught in assembly, broke apart. Some ran forward, some back, none with coordination. The firefight lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, 37 Japanese soldiers lay dead. Marine casualties, 1 wounded, Oakes, grazed by a ricochet. The radio man called it in. Contact successful. Moving to Rally Point Bravo. By 0200 hours, the situation had multiplied. Reports came in from adjacent units. Japanese forces were probing the entire marine perimeter, battalion strength or greater. Radio traffic surged. Units called for ammunition resupply, for corpsmen, for orders. At the regimental command post, 2 miles east, Colonel Merritt Edson listened to the chaos and recognized it. This was the big push. Japanese forces wanted the airfield, Henderson Field, and they wanted it now. If they took it, the campaign collapsed. Edson's response was recorded in the operations log at 0214 hours. All units execute aggressive defense, disrupt enemy assembly, no withdrawal without authorization. Aggressive defense, a contradiction that made perfect sense to anyone who'd survived night combat. Connor's platoon had already demonstrated the principle. Now others followed. 3rd Platoon, under Lieutenant Howard, conducted a flanking movement that caught a Japanese company forming up for assault. 5th Platoon ambushed a mortar team, capturing 3 Type 89 mortars and 17 crates of ammunition. Each small action disrupted Japanese timing. Their attack, planned as a coordinated wave, fractured into isolated engagements. But the cost was mounting. Battalion casualty reports showed 18 dead, 46 wounded. Ammunition expenditure ran at 3 times normal rate. Connor's platoon dug in at Rally Point Bravo, a coral outcrop with overlapping fields of fire. They had 90 minutes before dawn. Monroe appeared from the darkness, uniform torn, face streaked with mud. "They're massing east of here," he said. "Battalion wants us to hold until 600, then pull back." Connor looked at his men. Oakes had his arm bandaged, already back on the line. Vasquez was changing radio batteries. Every Marine was functional, focused. "We can do better than hold," Connor said. The Japanese understood night operations, but they didn't understand this kind of night. Their doctrine emphasized discipline, cohesion, bayonet charges at close range. All of it required control, and control required communication. The Marines were destroying communication faster than it could be restored. At 0245 hours, Connor led a 5-man patrol toward the sound of Japanese officers shouting commands. They found a company headquarters, 3 tents, radio equipment, maps spread on folding tables, and 24 soldiers. The Marines opened fire from 30 meters, then withdrew before return fire could organize. The headquarters was abandoned within minutes, its maps and radios left behind. Vasquez grabbed a leather satchel containing marked overlays showing Japanese unit positions and attack routes. The intelligence would reach regimental headquarters by 0400 hours, giving American artillery every target it needed. This was the hidden arithmetic of night combat. Each disrupted headquarters was worth 100 casualties in terms of operational impact. The Japanese had numbers, perhaps 3 regiments against 2 Marine battalions, but numbers meant nothing if they couldn't be directed. By 0330 hours, Japanese commanders had lost contact with at least 6 subordinate units. Attack waves that should have hit simultaneously arrived piecemeal, allowing Marines to shift forces and mass fire. The principle was simple: break cohesion, force independent action, exploit confusion. Private Oakes, carrying extra ammunition for the Browning automatic rifle team, asked Connor if they were winning. Connor didn't answer immediately. Winning wasn't the right word. They were surviving by making survival impossible for the enemy. That was different. The jungle smelled like cordite and churned earth. Somewhere in the darkness, men were dying in 1s and 2s, Japanese and American both, each death a subtraction from someone's operational calculus. At 0415 hours, the tempo shifted. Japanese artillery, silent for an hour, resumed firing. This time the barrage was systematic, rolling fire that walked across Marine positions from west to east. Someone in their chain of command had restored control. The shells came in tight patterns, 60 seconds apart, professional gunnery. Connor's platoon pressed into the coral outcrop as explosions churned the jungle around them. Shrapnel whined overhead. The bombardment lasted 12 minutes, and when it lifted, the assault came immediately. Japanese infantry, perhaps 2 companies, moving in squad rushes with covering fire. This was different from earlier probes, organized, determined, executed with precision. The Marines returned fire, M1 rifles cracking in steady rhythm. The bar team, positioned on the left flank, poured out 20-round magazines. Tracers marked arcs through pre-dawn darkness, but the Japanese kept coming, using terrain skillfully, exploiting dead ground. They got within 50 meters before the first wave faltered. The second wave came 30 seconds later, fresh troops who'd watched the first group identify Marine positions. Basic fire and movement, infantry school fundamentals, applied with courage and discipline. Connor saw his ammunition situation deteriorating. Each Marine had maybe 30 rounds left. He called Monroe on the radio. "We need resupply or withdrawal authorization." Monroe's response was clipped. "Resupply inbound. ETA 10 minutes. Hold your ground." 10 minutes was eternity. The Japanese launched a third wave at 0428 hours. This one reached the perimeter. Close quarters fighting erupted. Rifles fired at arm's length, grenades thrown and thrown back, men grappling in the darkness. Oakes killed a Japanese soldier with his rifle butt when his ammunition ran out. Vasquez bayoneted another who came over the coral rim. The fighting was brutal, primordial, devoid of strategy. It lasted 90 seconds before the Japanese pulled back, leaving 18 bodies within the Marine perimeter. Ammunition resupply arrived at 0441 hours. 8 Marines carrying ammunition crates, moving in a crouch through the thinning darkness. They distributed M1 clips, bar magazines, grenades, and bandoliers for the 30 caliber machine gun. The resupply team also brought water and a 3-word message from Battalion. Reinforcements at dawn. Dawn was 19 minutes away. The eastern horizon showed the first grey promise of light. With visibility came advantages for both sides. Marines could coordinate fire, Japanese could mass forces. The equation would shift again. Connor redistributed his platoon, extending their line to cover approaches now becoming visible. He placed his best marksmen where they could interdict likely assembly areas. The Browning team moved to a position with overhead cover and a 70-degree arc. By 0455 hours, the Marine position resembled something from a field manual. Overlapping sectors, fallback routes marked, casualty collection point established, but field manuals assumed resupply, reinforcement, and relief. The Marines had none guaranteed. At 0502 hours, Japanese forces attacked again. This time they came from two directions simultaneously. A coordinated assault timed to exploit the transition from darkness to light. The Marines met them with concentrated fire. The bar team fired 180 rounds in 90 seconds. Riflemen worked their Garans methodically, 8 rounds, reload, 8 rounds. The machine gun fired in short bursts, conserving ammunition while denying ground. The attack broke after 6 minutes. Japanese casualties were severe, at least 40 men down in the approach lanes, but they'd achieved something. They'd identified the full extent of Marine positions. Their next attack would be informed by that knowledge. Connor understood the logic. He also understood they didn't have enough ammunition to stop another coordinated push. The sun broke over the ridge at 0523 hours. Everything became visible. The jungle, the bodies, the exhaustion on every face. At 0540 hours, American artillery opened fire. Not the sporadic missions of the previous night, but a systematic barrage coordinated by maps captured from the Japanese headquarters. Shells fell on assembly areas, approach routes and suspected command posts. The Japanese, preparing for another assault, found themselves under sustained fire. The timing was precise. Strike when they're massed, before they can disperse. Casualties among Japanese forces were catastrophic. After-action reports estimate 600 killed in 30 minutes of artillery fire. The bombardment was enabled by intelligence gathered in darkness. Those captured maps and overlays providing exact coordinates. It was also enabled by American logistics, ammunition ships that had unloaded at Lunga Point 3 days prior, supply chains that functioned despite Japanese air raids, and artillery crews who'd maintained their guns through mud, heat, and exhaustion. The technical achievement was significant. The 105mm howitzers fired at maximum sustainable rate, crews loading, firing, and clearing in coordinated rhythm, barrels heated until paint smoked away. But the guns kept firing. By 0615 hours, Japanese offensive capability had collapsed. Their assault formations were shattered, command structure disrupted, and ammunition expenditure had reached critical levels. Radio intercepts, decoded later, showed Japanese commanders requesting permission to withdraw. The response from higher headquarters was unambiguous. Continue the attack. So they did, but without cohesion or coordination. Small groups advanced, were engaged, and fell back. Each attempt was weaker than the last. Connor's platoon, reinforced by a fresh squad at 0630 hours, held their position without further close combat. The battle had entered its final phase. Japanese forces withdrawing, Marines conducting limited pursuits, and headquarters staffs beginning the work of counting costs. At 0700 hours, Connor received orders to hold position and consolidate. The immediate crisis had passed. He looked at his men, filthy, exhausted, some wounded, all alive. Oakes was asleep against a tree, his rifle across his lap. The counting began at 800 hours. Casualty collection teams moved through the battlefield, identifying American dead and wounded, marking Japanese positions for burial details. The numbers emerged slowly, compiled from unit reports and field counts. Japanese dead. Initial estimates ranged between 2,800 and 3,400. The final tally, recorded 3 days later after systematic searches, confirmed 3,212 killed. Equipment captured or destroyed included 14 Type 89 mortars, 6 Type 92 machine guns, over 400 rifles, and substantial ammunition stocks. American casualties, 68 killed, 142 wounded. The disparity was stark. Tactical analyses would study it for years. How did two Marine battalions, outnumbered and fighting defensively, inflict such disproportionate casualties? The answers lay in accumulated details: aggressive defense that disrupted Japanese timing, captured intelligence that enabled precise artillery, and individual initiative exercised by small unit leaders. But statistics concealed human costs. Each of the 68 American dead had a name, a hometown, and a family who would receive a telegram. Private Daniel Oakes survived with a shrapnel wound that would leave a scar on his left forearm. Corporal Vasquez received the Silver Star for his actions as radio man and infantryman. Sergeant Connor was promoted to platoon sergeant and would fight through the rest of the campaign. Captain Monroe continued commanding the company until wounded at Cape Gloucester 2 months later. The battle's strategic impact was immediate. Japanese offensive capability on Guadalcanal was permanently crippled. They would never again threaten Henderson Field. American air operations continued uninterrupted, supporting the broader Solomon Islands campaign. But in the aftermath, walking through jungle still smoking from artillery fire, those strategic calculations felt abstract. The reality was simpler: men lying dead in the mud, others sitting in silence, and the work of recovery beginning under a cloudless morning sky. By 1,000 hours, the administrative machinery engaged. Battalion clerks typed casualty reports. Supply officers calculated ammunition expenditure. Over 40,000 rifle rounds fired, 1,200 bar rounds, 1,800 machine gun rounds, and 220 artillery shells. Logistics personnel began planning resupply convoys. Medical officers compiled injury statistics. Gunshot wounds predominated, followed by shrapnel injuries and blast trauma. The pattern was typical for night combat except for one anomaly: a higher than expected percentage of enemy casualties from artillery, reflecting the effectiveness of captured intelligence. At the regimental command post, Colonel Edson drafted his after-action report. The document, preserved in National Archives Record Group 127, describes the engagement with characteristic precision. Enemy forces, estimated at regimental strength, conducted coordinated night assault against 3rd Battalion positions. Attack was disrupted by aggressive patrolling and timely artillery support. Enemy suffered severe casualties and withdrew at dawn. The language was understated, almost bureaucratic. It mentioned casualties, unit designations, and timelines, but between the typed lines was the human experience: fear managed and courage demonstrated, decisions made in darkness with incomplete information, and survival earned through 1,000 small actions. Historians would later debate whether the battle represented a turning point or simply another engagement in a long campaign. The men who fought it had no such debates. They knew what they'd faced and what they'd done. That knowledge required no interpretation. Private Oakes, his arm bandaged and rifle cleaned, wrote a letter home that afternoon. The letter, donated to the Marine Corps archives by his daughter in 1987, contains one relevant passage. "We had a hard night, but everyone did their job. I'm okay and thinking of home." The brevity was characteristic. What could be said that would bridge the distance between a jungle battlefield and Sacramento, California? Some experiences resisted translation into words. Burial details worked through November 2nd and 3rd, interring Japanese dead in mass graves marked by coordinate stakes. American dead were wrapped in shelter halves and moved to the division cemetery near Lunga Point, where graves registration personnel would identify remains and arrange eventual repatriation. The work was grim, necessary, and conducted with respect, regardless of nationality. Chaplains accompanied the details. Marine Corps regulations required proper treatment of enemy dead, More importantly, it was the right thing to do. The men conducting burials were mostly rear echelon personnel: cooks, clerks, motor transport operators. Their service mattered too, though it rarely appeared in combat narratives. By November 4th, the battlefield was returning to jungle. Vines already crept over fighting positions. Rain washed away bloodstains. Within weeks, only the graves and a few rusted equipment fragments would mark where thousands had fought. The impermanence was striking. So much violence, so much death, absorbed by the jungle as if it had never happened. But it had happened. Records proved it. Casualty lists, after-action reports, intelligence summaries, and supply expenditure logs, each document a fragment of truth. Connor's platoon was pulled off the line on November 5th for rest and refit. They moved to a rear area where they received hot food, clean uniforms, and 72 hours of relative quiet. Oakes spent most of it sleeping. Vasquez wrote letters. Connor inspected equipment and talked with replacement personnel who would fill gaps in the roster. The replacements were young, nervous, eager to prove themselves. Connor remembered being that way once, a lifetime ago. He told them the truth. Follow orders, take care of your weapon, and look after the man next to you. Everything else was details. The replacements nodded solemnly, understanding nothing yet. That was fine. Understanding came with experience, and experience couldn't be taught. On November 8th, headquarters published a summary of operations for the period October 28th, November 3rd. The document circulated through command levels, eventually reaching staff officers in Noumea and Pearl Harbor. It confirmed what frontline troops already knew. Japanese offensive capability on Guadalcanal was finished. Subsequent enemy actions would be defensive, delaying, or withdrawal operations. The strategic initiative had shifted permanently. American planners began preparing for the next phase, operations in the Northern Solomons and eventually the Central Pacific Drive. Guadalcanal transitioned from active combat zone to rear area, still important, but no longer the decisive theatre. Henderson Field expanded to accommodate bomber squadrons that would support operations hundreds of miles away. The administrative transformation was rapid, almost clinical. Within weeks, the island that had consumed so many lives became a logistics node. But for the men who'd fought there, particularly those present on the night of November 1st to 2, the experience remained immediate. They carried it forward to subsequent campaigns, a reference point against which all later combat was measured. Years later, when historians interviewed veterans, many returned to that night. Not because it was representative, most combat wasn't that intense, but because it concentrated everything warfare demanded: courage, endurance, initiative, and luck. The official history of the 1st Marine Division, published in 1949, dedicates 3 pages to the engagement. It describes terrain, unit movements, and casualty figures. It quotes Colonel Edson's after-action report and provides maps showing Japanese approach routes. What it cannot convey is the weight of darkness, the sound of mortars falling, or the split-second decisions that determined who lived and who died. Those elements existed only in memory, growing more distant with each passing year but never fully fading. Some experiences marked you permanently. This was one. The file closed officially on December 15, 1943, when the last supplementary reports reached division headquarters. The paperwork was complete, awards processed, casualties accounted for, equipment losses reconciled against supply records. From an administrative perspective, the engagement was finished. But certain numbers lingered. 3,212 Japanese killed, 68 Americans killed. The ratio, approximately 47.1, was extreme even by Pacific War standards. Analysis focused on explanations, superior firepower, effective leadership, defensive advantages, and Japanese tactical errors. All were valid. But they missed something fundamental. What happens when determined men, properly led and equipped, refuse to yield ground? The Marines on Guadalcanal had demonstrated that principle repeatedly over 16 months of fighting. The night of November 1st to 2 simply provided another data point. Sergeant Jack Connor survived the war, returning to Ohio in 1946. He worked construction, raised 3 children, and rarely discussed combat except with other veterans. In 1982, he attended a Marine Corps reunion and met Private, now retired Master Sergeant, Daniel Oakes. They talked for hours, not about tactics or strategy, but about specific moments, the smell of the jungle, the weight of equipment, faces of men long dead. Corporal Luis Vasquez died in 1979, but his Silver Star citation is preserved at the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico. It describes his actions during the night engagement with the precise language of military awards. Extraordinary heroism, complete disregard for personal safety, and in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. The words were formulaic, but earned. Captain Raymond Monroe retired as a colonel in 1959. His personal papers, donated to the Marine Corps Archives, include a journal entry from November 3rd, 1943. We held. Costs were high, but could have been catastrophic. Good men did hard things in the dark. The archival record of that night, radio logs, casualty reports, ammunition expenditure sheets, intelligence summaries, rests in storage boxes at the National Archives. Researchers access them occasionally when studying Pacific War tactics or Marine Corps history. The documents are brittle now, typed on paper that yellows with age, but the numbers remain clear. Units engaged, coordinates, timelines, outcomes. Each statistic represented a human moment, a decision made, a trigger pulled, a life ended or preserved. The strategic significance was real. Japanese forces never again threatened Henderson Field. American air operations expanded, supporting the northward advance through the Solomons and eventually into the Central Pacific. The battles at Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa built upon lessons learned in the jungles of Guadalcanal. Some of those lessons came from the night of November 1st too, the value of aggressive defense, the importance of small unit initiative, and the combat multiplier of accurate intelligence. But the men who fought that night weren't thinking about strategic significance or historical lessons. They were thinking about surviving until dawn, protecting the man next to them, and completing their mission. The courage required was ordinary in the sense that thousands demonstrated it throughout the war. It was extraordinary in that it asked everything of imperfect humans, and they delivered. The file may have closed, but the memory endured. In reunion speeches, memorial services, and quiet moments of reflection, veterans returned to that night, not to glorify war. They knew its costs too well. But to remember when they'd been tested completely and hadn't failed. That memory was worth preserving. The official record preserved numbers and timelines. Memory preserved something else. The knowledge that when everything was at stake, on a jungle ridge under a moonless sky, they had held the line.